Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this new video in which we continue our close reading of Dialectic of Enlightenment by Theodor, Adorno and Horkheimer. Today we're going to read the sixth section of the chapter on the culture industry. Now this section is where Adorno and Horkheimer introduced the notion of pseudo-individuality. We hinted at it and mentioned it a few times before, but this is where it appears in the text. And it is defined as individuals are tolerated only as far as their wholehearted identity with the universal is beyond question. The individual trait is reduced to the ability of the universal so completely to mold the accidental that it can be recognized as accidental. So what this means is that pseudo-individuality is when you identify with the universal while also claiming that you are yourself, that you are unique. It's like with fashion trends where people copy each other while each claiming to be original and everyone else is fake. The reverse is also true when you have people who criticize others for following trends while they, original as they are, stay away from fashion and trends. This is like the example we gave in a previous section about, you know, when people go to nature as to escape technology, but they bring in their phones to make selfies or bring their ghetto blasters and make a rave there in nature. Like they just reproduce what they despised in towns, but now at least they do it in the open air, and that would make them somehow, you know, different. So pseudo-individuality is to claim that you are original, that you stand out from the collective, when in reality you are just a copy in the collective. Like everyone claims to be original in a collective where everyone actually looks the same. So this kind of individuality is one that is manufactured. Like imagine a factory that produces individuals like toys. They all have different colors, different shapes, different voices, different gestures, but they are all the same because they are produced by the same formula, by the same universal principle. So the rebel, the creative genius that we see on screens, the self-confident, you know, gentleman who walks like he's constantly living in a show, you know, the people who appear as if they are trapped in a slow motion sequence of a movie, that's what we are talking about here. Adorno compares them to Yale locks. Yale here isn't the university, but a company that sells locks. And the locks, they only differ from each other in just, you know, a few millimeters. So there is nothing significant in their differences. At the most fundamental level, they are all the same locks. And so, like Adorno and Horkheimer said, the accidental here is confused with the universal. In traditional philosophy, the accidental and the universal were not identified with each other, but clearly distinct. And it is true that traditionally these two notions, the accidental and the universal, were in a hierarchical relation. Like, you know, the universal was above the accidental. In philosophy, the accidental is what may or may not happen, whereas the universal is what can only happen, what must happen, like by necessity. Take this glass, for example. Now it has a shape, it has a color, it has a weight. I mean, it's colorless, but you get the point. Now these are accidentals. The glass can be of a different shape, or it can have, you know, a different color. Maybe it doesn't have. Maybe it has, a handle, you know, to hold it, but the universal is what is necessary for the glass to be a glass. If I cannot carry liquid in it, then it's not a glass anymore. If I cannot pour liquid in it and I cannot drink it, well, this is not a glass then. So in traditional metaphysics, the essence of the glass is valued over the accident of the glass. And that was kind of a problem. If you translate this on society, it means that there are things deemed essential for people to have in order to be considered human beings, or that, you know, among those human beings, some humans are closer to the essence of human beings than others. You can easily see the racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, all kinds of xenophobias, and even speciesism coming from miles away when you take the essence as being, you know, superior, when the universal is superior to the accident. So the universal was always seen as a form of social control, like it is a pretext to prevent people from precisely being individuals, since they always had to conform to the ideal of the universal. So once you give in to the universal, once you accept your nature or your essence, then you can do whatever you want. So you have to comply with the system in order to be an individual. So you are allowed to have all the accidents, the accidentals that you wish for, as long as it doesn't jeopardize your relationship with the universal. And now this was problematic, but at least according to the authors, it left some rooms for metaphysics, which, as we explained, has revolutionary potential. Like at least accidentals and universals were not confused with one another. But when they got confused with one another, Adorno argues, we didn't liberate individuals, we didn't liberate individuality like liberalism promised. It replaced individuality with pseudo-individuality. Like allowing people to embrace their individuality was too risky, and the changes brought by Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution made clear that the hierarchy between the universal and the accident and the accidental can no longer be maintained. So the ruling classes had to find ways to maintain that hierarchy. And so how can we make sure that people would still bow to the universal, where their solution is to make the universal and the accidental the same thing? Like now, your individuality is the same thing as the universal. You know, like you are the instrument of social control now. So let's use our universal formula to give the people what they want, to make them, you know, the individuals that they want to be, the free individuals that they imagine that they are. And so that way we maintain the power, and they, the people, individuals, can get to experience their so-called individuality without, you know, being a threat to the hierarchical system. So in other words, they want individuality, they have to order it from us, and we will engineer it. Now, as we said, even the ruling class is being engineered by the culture industry, but I think this analogy is, you know, efficient to help you visualize what Adorno is saying. Basically, the culture industry doesn't want you to know that your individuality is being manufactured. You order it without knowing that you order it. And so that way your individuality appears to have come naturally to you. Like no one influenced you or forced you to buy the Che Guevara t-shirt, for example, or to have you know, this bald and bearded look. Like no one forced you to put on, you know, the veil if you are a Muslim. Like everything is just your own choice. Quote, the peculiarity of the self is a socially conditioned monopoly commodity misrepresented as natural. So the accidents that we mentioned earlier, they become your very own essence. You know, the appearances, what appears at first glance becomes the same as the universal. So when someone sees your looks, hears your voice, sees your gestures, they are supposed to have captured everything about you. You know how people who are obsessed with body language or, you know, vulgar psychology, they pretend to be able to know everything about you just from the first interactions that you had with them. That's what we are dealing with here. The belief that the things that I see first, the accidentals, are the same as the universal. There is no depth for the individual anymore, no mystery, nothing beneath the surface. At least metaphysics admitted that there is more than just the accidentals, like that appearances do conceal more than what we think. And even though the things concealed served for ideological purposes, they at least, you know, recognize that people and beings are more complex than what they present themselves with. And in that recognition, accidentals actually enjoyed some independence from the universal. Like the concealment of the universal meant that accidents can never be grasped by some universal formula. Like my appearance is free from the universal because it maintains some mystery, because it maintains some unknown potential that no one can exploit. But now, none of those accidents can be free, since they were all reduced to the power of the same universal. Tragedy that used to lie in that mystery, which no social system can account for, is now reduced to the needs of that social system. And we talked about this last time. Quote, pseudo-individuality is a precondition for apprehending and detoxifying tragedy. Only because individuals are none but mere intersections of universal tendencies is it possible to reabsorb them smoothly into the universal. So what bourgeois society has obtained wasn't individuality, but a chimera with its obsession with synthesis. What liberalism did was to claim that its ruling class, the bourgeoisie, has achieved the perfect harmony between particular and the universal. So bourgeois society proclaimed that its model of individuality is the only model for individuality, being therefore the first to make the claim that individuality equals the universal. And from there, it began to export this model all over the world. Like we are all like the bourgeoisie, a mere species that of human beings, and our interest as a species is the same as the bourgeoisie and any other species on the planet. We all have the same interest, and that is to reproduce. So self-preservation is the universal of the bourgeois individual. And so once you reach the universal, there is nothing more to do but to keep reproducing, right? You are already at the top anyways. So you either go down or you stay at the top. So you multiply, you reproduce, you want to reproduce that top over and over again, and so you want to plant it everywhere. So I mean, after all, who in their right mind would ever resist this? You are bringing the universal, you know, no one can be against that. That's the best that human history has ever produced, right? And so it's funny, by the way, that in the 1947 version, Adorno and Horkheimer, they write this: every bourgeois character expressed the same thing, even and especially when deviating from it, the harshness of competitive society. Like the asterisk on bourgeois in 1944, it was written German bourgeois character. It suggested that the bourgeois character that Adorno and Horkheimer saw in Germany is no more limited to just Germany, but has planted itself everywhere, planted its seeds everywhere. It became a universal trait, and you can see the colonial aspect of this. This is the famous right of man, which already Marx mocked as being the rights of the bourgeois man. It's the ideal man for the bourgeoisie, and it wants to impose it on the world. Now, Adorno and Horkheimer are not, of course, criticizing the concept of individuality or even of the individual as understood by liberalism, but what they are criticizing is its homogenizing effect. Like liberalism isn't really liberating individuality. The project kind of failed for Adorno, but they are trying to save it. Now, Adorno and Horkheimer are trying to save that project, to liberate individuality. So the critique of the Frankfurt School isn't much a critique of Western civilization, as it is sometimes used, and it is not a critique that would allow other cultures to remain static either. It's something that we hear often. People use critical theory to direct it towards the West, but don't really want to apply it for their own local or national culture. As if you criticize the West, but just to reinforce your own status quo. So be careful with that. That's not what Adorno and Horkheimer are doing. Rather, the critique of Adorno and Horkheimer is about giving everyone the power to be an individual, and for cultures to change into what they deem best for them. Not what the West or the United States or the USSR or the culture industry decides for them. It's for everyone to be free from pseudo-individuality. Like, this is the goal of critical theory, and that starts with understanding how pseudo-individuality is working in the culture industry. So the universal that the industry is legitimizing is the principle of constant competition. Self-preservation entails competition, because through competition you can easily create the illusion that the status quo is constantly being challenged. You feel like you are imposing your own individuality by comparing you with competitors. So it is by deviating from the same character, from the model of the bourgeois individual, that pseudo-individuality is actually created. When you keep asserting yourself through competition, you confirm the principle of self-preservation. Like in the survival of the fittest mentality, we change, but only to preserve what's already here. So paradoxically, the fittest in evolution is the most conservative, right? So remaining the same through constant competition gives the illusion of individuality, because it gives this illusion that we are changing. Like we see this all the time in our cultures, which hate it when people change. Change is always for the worst. Even if you change for the better, it's always suspicious. Like people who learn from their mistakes are either hypocrites or brainwashed. So the point of all antagonisms, of all competition, is actually to remain the same. The winner of every competition is the one who gets through the battlefield while remaining constant. Like the change is only on the surface level. If change is allowed, it must only be to make the old you more persistent. So in short, there is no such thing as a new me. There is not even a me at all. The freedom of, that me, as Adorno says, it actually bears the stain of society. It is the product of society, its economy, its apparatus. So the freedom of the bourgeois individual it's an ideological construction which the individual must deny or be blind to. So through the series of these new me's that appear at the end of every competition, there's a system that reproduces itself with, growing power. With, each competition only strengthens its power. However, this me exists for Adorno and Horkheimer. Like I said, they're not against the project of liberalism or enlightenment or of authenticity. The project was to bring that me into maturity, like concept. And it could have been realized through technology. It could have been realized through technology. Quote, at the same time, the advance of bourgeois society has promoted the development of the individual. Against the will of those controlling it, technology has changed human beings from children into persons. So the idea that the individual must grow out of the child, to be autonomous and to rely on himself instead of relying on tutors and hierarchies, that's still the goal of the Frankfurt School. And if you remember, that is the goal that Immanuel Kant laid down in his essay, What is Enlightenment? The difference, the point of the Frankfurt School is they are just trying to explain why the process of maturity got actually stuck at adolescence. And they argue that the process, the reason why it got stuck, it didn't come from the outside, but from the principles of enlightenment itself. Mainly, it is the principle of self-preservation, which naturally will confine technology to only serve competition, to serve nothing but individuals' own purposes alone. The problem is, the purpose of the individual are not the best guide for individuation, which is the process for the formation of the individual. Like in liberal and competitive societies, the individual finds himself having many hundreds of personal purposes scattered through infinite spheres, with each one trying to magnify those purposes so that they can sell him stuff. In other words, competition led to the manufacturing of the individual, leaving him unable to gather his pieces in order to become himself. And that's how you create fascists. As they say, the citizens whose lives are split between business and private life, their private life between ostentation and intimacy, their intimacy between the solemn community of marriage and the bitter solace of being entirely alone, at odds with themselves and with everyone, are virtually already Nazis, who are at once enthusiastic and fed up, or the city dwellers of today who can imagine friendship only as a social contract between the inwardly unconnected. So this certainly sounds familiar, right? Like you probably are familiar with this feeling of being fractured, of being, a stranger to yourself because you are constantly worrying about so many things at once, and it makes you feel guilty, or it makes you feel like a hypocrite, that you are not good enough. And so the culture industry presents you a catalog with stereotypes, and the stereotypes that we see on the screen and in the magazines seem to be, they seem to be complete, right? They seem to have their life in order, they seem to have their shit together, and so you ask yourself, well, why can't I have that too? And soon it will seem as a joke, like even those stereotypes, like we don't believe in them anymore. Maybe your conservative parents do, but for most, we look at those magazines, those stereotypes with cynicism now. But even that cynicism is manufactured by the industry. To be cynical about, stereotypes is itself a stereotypes. If we hope that cynicism and the acknowledgement that we are fractured might pose a threat to the system because we don't believe in its stereotypes, we are just wrong as believing that human beings won't trade their individuality for those stereotypes, right? So in short, whether you accept the stereotypes in hopes that you will find unity in them, or believe that it is impossible and we are fractured, in either cases you are giving in to the culture industry. The industry produces both the fracturing and the stereotype at once, and it does that so much so that even being fractured becomes a stereotype. So individuality has been destroyed, and now all we have to fill the void with is stereotypes, even if it is stereotypes that reject stereotypes. So whether it is the stereotype of the complete hero or the fractured anti-hero, as Adorno says, the unity of the personality has been recognized as illusory since Shakespeare's Hamlet. In the synthetically manufactured physiognomies of today, the fact that the concept of human life ever existed is already forgotten. For centuries, society has prepared for Victor Mathieu and Mike Rooney. They come to fulfill the very individuality they destroy. So Mathieu and Rooney are famous actors. We already mentioned Rooney in a previous video. He's like the stereotype of the anti-hero, the rebel filled with youth vitality. And Mathieu is more of the traditional hero, the stereotype that brings order. And so we are kind of stuck between those two stereotypes, either pseudo-individuality based on a Rooney character or a pseudo-individuality based on a mature character. But whatever the choice is, as Adorno points, the end is going to be, well, the average. Like the illusion of equality and freedom is conveyed through the glorification of what is average. The characters that we see on the screen are often average people. They come from the same backgrounds as we, the elite is rarely glorified in movies, actually. Like it's often, they are often depicted as villains or hypocrites, or simply, they play a minor role. The action mostly focuses on average people, average folks. And they are being played by high-paid stars, right? So this for Adorno, it contributes to the cult of what he calls cheapness. When the cheap is giving the allure of the expensive, let Gucci put their hand on a regular thrift shop bag and it turns into a luxury, their brand, when Gucci puts their brand on a regular thrift shop bag, the thrift shop now becomes, a luxury. So the process of turning life into a stereotype also means turning everything into an ad. Like having rich actors playing average people is like doing an ad. You take something that is cheap, like a carton of milk, and all of a sudden it becomes a symbol of prestige because there is a brand on it, like especially when the same star appears on the cheap commercials, right? So what the culture industry does is use beauty to make the mundane, the average, the cheap, beautiful and attractive. And it's the same when you live in a representative democracy, where the elite represents the people. They play literally the role of the people and they take decisions in its name. Having the hot supermodel playing the role of the insecure shy girl, for example, has the same effect. Let those in power decide how your life should look like. And you can trust them because they will make it beautiful for you. But that's the problem. Like, making it beautiful doesn't mean fixing what is wrong with it. So the commodification of beauty serves as a silencing tool. By painting the world with beauty, you give your consent to being represented by the elite. So let the system itself play your life for you. And so beauty has only one purpose here: utility. Quote, Socrates' dictum that beauty is the useful has at least been ironically fulfilled. Now, for Socrates, the beauty is defined as the useful, that is true, but in the case of Socrates, the useful gets its usefulness from its beauty. Like, the useful is useful because it is beautiful. If it weren't beautiful, like in its essence, then it won't be useful. But even if I don't use you, you remain beautiful nonetheless. Socrates views beauty as the essence of things, or very close to their essence, and so beauty and usefulness, which is, closer to the accident, are here separate. However, here we have the reverse. The beautiful is beautiful because of its usefulness. But since also essence and accident are confused, the beautiful becomes the useful. If I cannot use something for my own purposes, then that thing cannot be beautiful at all. So for everything to be beautiful, it must be useful to something else, something with power over it. And so the useful is always an object. It is beautiful only because it serves the interests of a subject. So as such, we are encouraged to see the beauty of the world, but only for its instrumentality. And that includes also us, also human beings. We are told that our beauty comes from the fact that we are useful for the system. Without the system, our lives are, they're worth nothing. We are cheap utensils without the brand, right? But because we submit, because we accept to be branded, we can see ourselves being played by beautiful people. So our cheapness is elevated to the rank of the gods once we submit to their will. And so we will know what it is like to have, expensive things by making the cheap beautiful. As Adorno says, for a few coins you can see the film which costs millions. For even less you can buy the chewing gum behind which stand the entire riches of the world, and the sales of which increase those riches still further. All this mockingly resembles the land of milk and honey, as the national community apes the human one. Something is served up for everyone. So, mass production has indeed allowed for many to enjoy things that used to be expensive, and so only the privilege that used to be the privilege of only a few rich elites. However, it also made it so that now everything is cheap and mixed that, and it confused that cheapness, or equated that cheapness with beauty. The result was, because what is cheap, is useful. So the cheap is what is beautiful. So the result was that the only thing we get to be enthusiastic about is how much we produce and how much we consume. What is beautiful is precisely this fact. We produce and consume mountains of junk in almost no time. But nothing is beautiful on its own here. In other words, what is beautiful is the quality of things produced and consumed, and it's not their quality or depth. Even going to the theater has nothing to do with the movies themselves, but simply to be able to go to the theater. That's what is being glorified here. Like, we produced this huge building, let's just marvel at what can be done with the money, right? So even if the cinema shows you only bad or dumb movies, they know that you will be coming back for more, even though you left the theater disappointed. Because what is important is not your opinion of the movie, but that the ticket was cheap. And the theater was, enormously impressive. and the monopoly controls it. That's what it, that's like at the end of the day, no matter how much people are mad at a multinational brand, the brand knows that the world would still bow down to it. Because, you know, protest is basically just pleading for those in power to change their policies. In the end, the power remains between their hands. You know, eventually the necessity of the market wins over, and you will remain loyal to the institution. But the commodification of beauty also means the commodification of art. Like, not liking the movies thrown at you and demanding better quality from the monopoly, well, that lets the monopoly in place. It will just, you know, commodify beauty into another cheap product until you are happy with what you get. Art is therefore constantly commodified and will remain obedient to the interests of the monopoly and the laws of the market. It's like, you know, the same railroad, but we are just changing tracks here. At the end of the day, the individual is known for never daring to throw away the whole road or replace it with one in which, you know, he has a say in its production. What he does is just, you know, what the individual does is just lead to those in charge to change the tracks so that, you know, the waste goes to someone else's backyard, probably someone lower in the social hierarchy. So keeping art as a commodity means that we don't allow for art to communicate to people a revolutionary alternative to the status quo. When art, you know, the tool for revolution, let's say, when art remains a commodity, it remains between the hands of the industry. And so the railroad stays as it is. We are just, you know, changing the tracks. But art commodifies itself in two ways. The first is the classic art becomes marketable, like literally a commodity we buy on the market. In this way, art becomes dependent on the market and on the economy. It must sell, it must be innovative, etc. Art now dutifully admits to being a commodity, abjures its autonomy, and proudly takes its place among consumer goods that has the charm of novelty. But it can also commodify itself by maintaining its autonomy from the market. And so this is the famous l'art pour l'art that we already criticized with Nietzsche last time. Art must serve no purpose but itself. However, such art refuses to be useful to society and becomes just a pastime for the bourgeoisie. So the bourgeoisie does maintain art free from markets, but it also prevents it to have any contact with society. And therefore art turns into a commodity as a fetish in the Marxist sense. It negates that art has any economic or material conditions, as if art and artistic inspiration are not the product of real material conditions. You know, art becomes a negation of society here, which isn't what we want either, right? Quote, art was only ever able to exist as a separate sphere in its bourgeois form. Even its freedom as negation of the social utility, which is establishing itself through the market, is essentially conditioned by the commodity economy. Pure works of art which negated the commodity character of society by simply following their own inherent laws were at the same time always commodities. So, even if art was subject to the demands of the market before the 19th century, as we already explained in previous videos, since it was sponsored by patrons, and despite that the patron and the artist maintain some autonomy respectively from one another, it would be absurd to say that the artist did not produce an art that is aligned with the economic interests of their patrons. And so the same is happening today too, with artists having to please the gallery owners, the commissioners, and the producers, but it would be wrong to think that an art for its own sake is any different. That is still a commodity. Art has only obtained this status of autonomy from the market only when it was decided that art has nothing to teach. Art had to make a deal. If it doesn't want to be corrupted by the market, it must give away its social role in society, its role in society. It had to become obsolete. It had to become something purposeless. So art was in a dilemma. Either stay in society and become corrupt by the market, or let the market decide everything in society and liquidate itself socially into an ivory tower. Quote, the purposelessness of the great modern work of art is sustained by the anonymity of the market. So the artist who liquidated art from society now must live on his own, and he must provide for himself. Like we explained, he can no longer count on the patrons. If he makes art his main activity, unless he's rich, he'll die poor and hungry. And as such, he already confirmed the superiority of the market and must remain an exile from society as an artist, since his art won't have anything useful to say. Adorno gives an example with Beethoven and the novelist Walter Scott. Beethoven is the rich who doesn't want to corrupt his art, while Scott is the novelist of the market. He says, the mortally sick Beethoven, who flung away a novel by Walter Scott with the cry, "The fellow writes for money," while himself proving an extremely experienced and tenacious businessman in commercializing the last quartet's works, representing the most extreme repudiation of the market, offers the most grandiose example of the unity of the opposites of market and autonomy in bourgeois art. So, for art to become, for art's sake, to become purposeless is itself a purpose of the market. And so this is the principle of the idealist conception of aesthetics, which means that we have to talk about Kant here. Adorno mentions Kant, or more like alludes to him when he writes, the principle of idealist aesthetics, purposiveness without purpose, reverses the schema socially adopted by bourgeois art, purposelessness for purposes dictated by the market. Now, the asterisk refers to a passage from Immanuel Kant's Critique of Judgment, and the translation here is that of J.H. Bernard from 1892, and he's referring to the definition that Kant gives of the beautiful at the third moment of the definition. Like for Kant, there are 4 moments to define the beautiful, or like 4 steps. There's the notion of taste, universal, purpose, and necessity. And we only need the third here, so I won't go into the 3 others. But again, when I do a close reading of Kant, we will see what those are. So let's say a few words on that. So for Kant, beauty is grounded on a feeling of pleasure. It is a process that happens in the subject. So beauty is not in objects. When I come across an object and say, "Hey, this is beautiful," I am feeling some pleasure within me. So beauty is subjective. But it's very different from how we understand subjectivity. It's not in the sense that this is beautiful for me, but not for you. But again, that's the second moment, and that's not really important here. The reason why I bring up subjectivity here is because for Kant, the feeling of beauty, being subjective, requires no knowledge to be felt and has no objective rules for it either. And so, weirdly, when we are in presence of beauty, we simply know it. Like we know the beautiful because we are just feeling it. But at the same time, we are totally incapable of explaining or saying why it is beautiful. Like we experience it as an inexplicable certainty, mysterious, and at the same time, obvious. And this is also why, generally speaking, when we come across beauty by chance, by meeting a person or in a street, it always takes us by surprise, as if we haven't been prepared for the encounter, and all the while being certain that it is there, that there is a kind of meaning to the world. We don't know anything about this beauty, but the simple fact of feeling it is kind of enough for us. And so this brings us to the third moment, which is the moment referred by Adorno. If there are no criteria, no standards, no concept to understand beauty, then beauty has no determined origins. There is no purpose either, as if the beauty we feel is something that we identify for its own sake, without a specific goal. It is its own purpose, right? Or rather, it is a purposiveness without purpose, and therefore it always takes us towards infinity, constantly towards infinite, constantly renewed horizons. Like in short, we can never stop being ecstatic in front of the same beauty. A landscape, for example, can always amaze us. So keep that in mind, that Kant is more interested in natural beauty than artistic beauty, and one could wonder if appreciating works of art does not require a certain form of knowledge. Like artistic beauty has to adhere to a norm, to a model, but the beauty of nature seems superior to it because it is a pure beauty which is free. It is free from knowledge. That is to say, it doesn't reproduce anything, and it does not meet any rules. That's when you look at the landscape. It's not reproducing anything like you would do in a work of art, and it doesn't seem to obey any specific artificial rules or conventions or norms. But we can still apply this to some extent to art. When I see a painting that is beautiful, I know it is beautiful, but I don't really know why. Since I feel a beauty, there is an effect that is taking place. So there is a purposiveness, but I don't seem to find its purpose. So beauty is just is. And that's all there is to it. It is completely detached and disinterested. For Kant, idealist aesthetics means that beauty has no purpose. It only has purposiveness. This, of course, was supposed in Kant's theory to be an open door towards imagination and freedom. But this principle of the purposiveness without purpose turns art into a commodity. It is reversed in the market into purposelessness for the purposes of the market. Since the purposiveness of beauty contains no object, no purpose, the market has planted its own purposes instead. Now, the purposelessness of beauty serves to reinforce the market. Whereas in Kant's ideal, beauty was supposed to give freedom to the imagination of the subject, the market limits that imagination by forcing it to obey its own purposes, the purposes of the market. So in both cases, art is a commodity. Whether it is an art that is in an art gallery, ready to be sold for an auction, or in your studio for your own feelings of contemplations, in both cases, it has a price on it. Like Kant himself said that the role of art is simply to please the subject. The object of art has no purpose on its own, other than providing a feeling of pleasure in the subject. And since the feeling is created by the subject and not coming from the object becomes subservient to the subject's needs and feelings. It can easily become a commodity that satisfies the needs of the consumer. So in short, there is no such thing as a purposeless art in the culture industry. Every form of art must serve the purposes of the market, whether it makes money or not. If it makes money, then the market rejoices. If it doesn't, the market rejoices too, since it proved its superiority over all talks of pure aesthetics. So when an artist goes hungry, it is a win for the industry, just like it is a win for the industry when, just like it is a win, for example, when for an animal species, when its weaker members die. And so hence you see the irony. The more art confines itself to the useless, to the disinterested, to the purposeless, the more useful and interested it becomes. And so the more useful it becomes, the more it confirms its status as useless. And so, as Adorno says, for the use which is made of the work of art in antagonist society is largely that of confirming the very existence of the useless, which art's total subsumption under usefulness has abolished. in adapting itself entirely to need, the work of art defrauds human beings in advance of the liberation from the principle of utility which it is supposed to bring about. So, purpose, and we're talking about purpose of utility, has completely overtaken the sphere of the purposeless. And therefore, art, when it is going to liberate man from utility through its imaginative faculties, well, it simply reinforces utility by refusing to be limited to utility. Like art and beauty can be highways to Kant's political ideals, the kingdom of ends. This is a state in which all people are treated never as means but as ends in themselves. But the irony is that by refusing to become a means, a commodity on the market, by refusing to serve utility, art has made the market even stronger and led to its own commodification. And by confining itself to the sphere of pure aesthetics, art became a matter of prestige, of bringing, connoisseurs from the bourgeoisie to contemplate works of art in their own little bubble. Art may have been spared utility in one form, but became a commodity anyways. Just not one for use, but one for exchange. Quote, what might be called use value in the reception of cultural assets is being replaced by exchange value. Enjoyment is giving way to being there and being in the know, connoisseurship by enhanced prestige. So this is something like the theory of cultural capital. It's a theory proposed by the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. Bourdieu isn't mentioned by Adorno. This is just me bringing up this cultural capital. I mean, Bourdieu came way after Adorno. So cultural capital is the culture that one has and one uses to maintain their social position. It's a way of demarking your social class from other classes. The elite has a culture that it chooses, like you use an economic capital. Like we use assets, different classes have also, cultural assets. You know how someone would use their cultural knowledge, for example, to establish dominance over someone else? Taste, for example, according to Bourdieu, isn't disinterested like Kant claimed. It serves it serves to legitimize someone's culture over another. So the taste of the rich is legitimate, whereas the taste of the working class is seen as inferior. And so the taste of the rich, because it is associated with success, becomes the taste that one must have in order to be accepted in society. So in short, culture becomes a way to create a social caste, to attract a certain category of people who create their own sphere and cut themselves from the rest. Culture, therefore, is creating different spheres, different categories, and to each it assigns something to be consumed. If you are rich, you have a specific culture to embrace, certain norms and codes. You must go to the opera, you must know the novels of Balzac and the symphony of Beethoven. And at the same time, if you are poor or middle class, likewise, you must embrace pop culture. You must know the popular character in the serials back then, like we today have to know the superheroes of Marvel and DC. You must have your subscription to the popular magazines and tabloids. So culture becomes a way for you to assert your loyalty to your class or your institution, to demonstrate that you are a member of that category. That is the point of culture. By consuming the culture through amusement, we just prove ourselves to be loyal to that culture, like a fan being loyal to their favorite artist. Quote, the consumer becomes the ideology of the amusement industry, whose institutions he or she cannot escape. One has to have seen Miss Miniver, just as one must subscribe to Life and Time. So Miss Miniver is a popular character of a serial back then, and Life and the Time are the famous magazines. So art, therefore, if it doesn't end up in the market, will serve a similar function. It serves as a basis for exchange. Commodities in the market give their worth from their exchange value. One product is worth another, or other products. So this phone, for example, has the value of, I don't know, 5 watches, maybe, for example, or it is worth a certain amount of money that is the same amount of buying the 5 watches. So the worth of something is determined by what you can exchange it with. And so in the case of art, that stays among the connoisseurs. The exchange is prestige. Art isn't valued for itself or for its own revolutionary or liberating potential, or even for beauty, but for the prestige that it can be exchanged with. And of course, it's the same with popular culture. The prestige of the elite classes that talk about art in their own pretentious way is also reflected in the consumers at the lower levels of the hierarchy who gossip about their favorite celebrities. So, in both cases, it is a demonstration of loyalty and exchange for social prestige. And from here, everything gets the same treatment. Everything becomes exchangeable with something else. Nothing can be one with itself. Its identity must always depend on the thing that it can be exchanged with or replaced by. And this is the basis for utility. Something only has a utility insofar as I can exchange it for something else. So my watch is only worth its price, or what I can buy for its price, and that's it. That's all that it is worth for. Quote, everything is perceived only from the point of view that it can serve as something else, however vaguely that other thing might be envisaged. Everything has value only insofar as it can be exchanged, not insofar as it is something in itself. So art becomes a fetish, which for Adorno means that you take the social valuation of a work of art to be the same as the merit of that work of art. Remember, a fetish is something that hides reality from you and replaces it with something else. In art, the fetish becomes when we consider something to be great because everyone talks about it. No one asks what's so great about the art, but because we don't want to be ostracized from the group, we will just roll with it if the group already agrees that the work of art is great. We don't know why, but everyone says that this is a great work of art, so we say that it is a great work of art. So we enjoy a work of art because it makes us conform to a group, not because the work actually deserves the praise. So the point of enjoying art is simply to confirm that you belong to a specific group, that you are loyal to the industry, and that you accept the status quo. Or as Adorno says, art becomes a commodity to be sold but not for sale, saleable but not for sale. So even if there is no direct money involved, the work of art is still subject to the laws of the market. You can even say that the market truly realized the purposiveness without purpose of Kant in this way by making the purposiveness of art the saleable and the purpose the sales. Adorno gives the example of Arthur Toscanini. He was an Italian composer, and when you listen to him on the radio, you feel a simulation of Kant's purposiveness without purpose. Toscanini is unsaleable, unlike pop music. It's even a public service to play classical music on the radio. There is no money to be made, and there are no advertisements to interrupt the symphony. It really gives the impression that we are listening to Toscanini for nothing, for no purpose. But as Adorno says, this is a deception. You can say that the deception is the fact that it is a radio that is playing classical music, like radio is bringing high culture to the masses, so you cannot say that there is discrimination based on culture. Like, the rich aren't using their culture to create classes, they are bringing it to the masses. It gives the illusion that there are no class boundaries and we live in a true democracy, but we know that bullshit all too well. Now, rather, the deception that Adorno talks about is that we are made to think that it is really in a disinterested way that the radio is playing Toscanini. The interest is made indirectly. As he says, the deception takes place indirectly via the profit of all the united automobile and soap manufacturers on whose payments the stations survive, and of course via the increased sales of the electrical industry as the producer of the receiver sets. So what is interesting, in the 1944 version, the word replaced by deception was swindle, which means to deprive someone of money through a deception. Like we are giving some public services while companies, corporations and monopolies are sucking the life out of us. But hey, at least the elites are humble enough because they agree to share their culture with us. How thoughtful. We must have been wrong. There is no culture industry, right? Like when you consider that in order for you to have that public good, that Toscanini symphony on the radio, the public service must rely on countless private entities that are leeching on its ability to provide for anyone. When you consider that, how can you say that there are disinterested things, right? So radio only survives on the payments of the private sector, so it is dependent on it more than they are dependent on the radio. So how can a classical symphony brought about the public domain mean anything in this climate? It is, bound to adopt the strategies of those it relies on for survival. That's why that even if radio is still public, at the times of Adorno wrote the essay, he called it the commercial radio system in 1947 instead of broadcasting in 1944. And what is more alarming, the public services in such climate are more prone to become ideological mouthpieces for fascist dictators than the private sector. He compares radio with film, like film being a whole private enterprise is openly following the laws of the market, and as such it can resist to some extent other combines, combines meaning monopolies. Film industry can, for example, be in a competition with the automobile industry since both are private. But radio, because it is immune to liberal deviation, like Adorno says, is actually more vulnerable to become a tool for propaganda. It is more, vulnerable than film. So even when the Nazis made their propaganda through movies, they were met with resistance by other filmmakers. But when it comes to the radio, all those who could resist must have broadcasted from outside the nation. Being a public service, the radio obeys the government. If your government is fascist, then everything you will hear from the radio, especially classical music, is to convey fascist propaganda. And so what is better than the radio for the Führer to speak? What is better to even confirm the immunity of the radio from the liberal market? As you know, fascism is a reaction to liberalism, which turned out to be liberalism's own reaction to itself. Like fascists are always complaining about cultural degeneration, and they always ascribe this to liberalism, to the fact that markets have weakened us. Now for fascism, it's important that art and culture remain independent from markets. And radio was their way to make that point. So the idea that art should be immune to market laws didn't present a counterpower to capitalism. It simply became the perfect tool for fascist propaganda. So the radio, Adorno says, it thereby takes on the deceptive form of a disinterested, impartial authority, which fits fascism like a glove. In fascism, radio becomes the universal mouthpiece of the Führer. In the loudspeakers on the street, his voice merges with the howl of sirens proclaiming panic, from which modern propaganda is hard to distinguish in any case. So we can link this to what we already said concerning the transition from the telephone to the radio in a previous section. With the radio, everyone becomes listeners. No one can reply back, and so one message becomes easily the dominant one. Hitler did that. He used the radio more than films to convey his fascist ideology. Through the radio, he could establish himself like a divine figure whose words are the only ones that are legit and the only ones that create reality. And as you know, in theology, God creates the world through speech. He says, "Let there be light," and there was light. In the beginning, there was the Word. And so this metaphysical trait was given to the Führer, who can use the radio to create his own world. Quote, the Führer's metaphysical charisma, invented by the sociology of religion, turned out finally to be merely the omnipresence of his radio addresses, which demonically parodies that of the divine spirits. So the asterisk there on the sociology of religion refers to Max Weber. Weber was one of the fathers of sociology, and if you remember, we mentioned him in the concept of enlightenment. He's the guy who brought up the idea of disenchantment, and he also produced a lot of books on the sociology of religion. And here Adorno refers to another famous concept of Weber, that of the charismatic authority. What it means is that leaders must convey some sort of supernatural aura, like they must have a quality in them that strikes us as divine and not accessible for the ordinary person. Like their personality must radiate something otherworldly, like, prophets or mythical heroes. They have an intuition that is never wrong, and as they speak, you cannot help but feeling overwhelmed and seduced by their persona. So in short, charisma is when you feel the power of a leader, his aura envelops you, you're just being seduced by his body, his voice, his facial expression, his words, etc. You're like being hypnotized, and you cannot help but feeling that he is the one that will fix everything. And so charismatic leaders for Weber appear during times of crisis. And therefore everyone puts their trust in them because they feel that they have something special. And you don't know what, but it just seems like they know what they are talking about and they are the right man for the job. So the emphasis on the charisma conveys the idea that what is important about Hitler's speeches are not his words but his power. What is important is just the Führer's power. It doesn't really matter what he says. The content is absolutely irrelevant. Rather, it is the fact that he can say it, and only he can say it. It's that he can arouse the crowds with his voice, and that his voice can reach every single corner of society. What is important is that no one can escape his voice, rather than the content of his voice. The content is actually empty and no one actually cares about it. Just like every single single in the fascist world of the culture industry has no substance anymore, no single of music, no content. It can be anything. What matters is always the transaction. Just like for capitalism, what matters is whether something creates something or not, rather than its own merit as a work of art. In fascism, what matters is whether or not the words of the Führer convey his power. So no one cares about what is being said anymore. Whatever the Führer says must be true, even if it is a lie. I mean, I know it's a lie since we already said that in Enlightenment everything is a lie, but since he who utters it has power, then the lie must be useful. So even though the Führer's address is a lie, and I know that it's a lie, I don't even need to know what he said. From the fact that he has the power, it must be true. And likewise, I don't even need to really listen to Toscanini. I don't need to appreciate his music or even understand its coherence. What matters is that the radio lets me hear it. What is being conveyed through Toscanini is the benevolence of the industry, not the symphony. Quote, the gigantic fact that the speech penetrates everywhere replaces its content as the benevolent act of the Toscanini broadcast supplants its content, the symphony. But we have to understand that the charisma in question, since it's not about the content of what's being said, it is not an imposition. The power of the Führer lies in the idea that he is not a dictator. Again, the truth of enlightenment, that everything is a lie, means that no one can impose on you anything, but that everything is the product of choice. People know that everything is a lie. Their behavior means that whatever it is that they said or choose is their responsibility. Therefore, whatever end result we get must be rational. It must be that people chose the most useful lies among the range of possibilities. And so this is like when someone who is looking for imposing something does it through recommendation. The Führer is simply recommending a lie among many, and it is only out of your own free choice that you went along with it. Quote, to posit the human word as absolute, the false commandment is the immanent tendency of the radio. Recommendation becomes command. So if the voice of the Führer becomes the dominant one, it's again because that's what the people wanted. Because the voice must be powerful, and what is needed in a world of lies is only power. So there is no commandment in the Führer's voice. So this is like the pseudo-choice in God. You know what God makes a heaven and a hell, and he tells you that you can either choose to love him or reject his love. You know, God doesn't impose his love on you. If you end up in hell, you chose to reject his love. So God is actually giving all the freedom that someone can ask for, right? Well, it's the same thing here. Hitler, God, is only recommending his love. It's good for you that you love me, but I'm not, commanding you to. All those who ended up in the gas chamber simply rejected my love. But that's just sugarcoating, right? That's just the style that hides the content. The real content, if anyone paid attention to it, is this, according to Adorno. It's not that the nation provides for the people, but, quote, in a more modern, less ceremonious style, the further directly orders both the Holocaust and the supply of trash. It's like with the markets. We are just recommending product and a way of life. But we are not commanding anything. You are free. And there is no monopoly, of course. If you say, but your products are all the same, they answer with, no, they're not the same. We have different brand names. Again, the simple idea that one product has a different brand names makes it different from one another. And it is the same power that we imagined God would have. One day, the diktat of production, the specific advertisement veiled by the semblance of choice, can finally become the Führer's overt command. So add to this what we already said about making everything cheap, and you have the recipe for ideological monopoly. Like the cult of cheapness, the fact that today everything is cheap according to Adorno is a clever way for fascist monopoly to convey their message to wider audiences. Like getting a burger is cheaper than getting a salad, and so the ideology of the meat industry thrives. Given that the radio is free for the consumer, fascism acquires it. You know, when artisans are starving because their handmade chairs, tables, beds, and closets are way more expensive than the minimalist furniture you can get from IKEA, that's how ideology turns the recommendations into command. Under the guise of choice, you are commanded to obey to the ideology of the one who sells you the cheapest price. But to be able to sell for the cheapest price means that you have a big place on the market, or that your power is unquestionable. Like the dying small businesses will have to raise their prices, whereas the Walmarts and the Amazons lower theirs as they get bigger. And so the end result is, whenever you buy something, what you are actually buying is a political slogan. The culture industry has successfully hijacked the promise of providing for everyone. Again, the principle of castration is at play here. If you want to have access to your needs, you must abide to the political ideology of the strongest. We'll give you things for cheap prices, but you must prove your loyalty to the fascist regime. So the success of the industry brought then the last barrier against the debasement of culture to its knees. By taking away the commodity character of culture, the industry made it more into a commodity, something to be exchanged for prestige or for money. So what the culture industry is doing is the destruction of culture, and promoting this destruction as a democratic process and success. that everyone can afford a ticket to go to a music festival or to watch plays and opera concerts, that everyone can buy a washing machine, was sold as if the barriers between social classes have finally been lifted, whereas in reality, we are only reinforcing them. Even in education, we are being sold this idea that we have turned the democratic dream into a reality. Education and knowledge are not the privilege of the few anymore, but everyone can get an education now. Everyone can have access to high culture. Everyone can read classical novels and philosophy. Books are cheap and anyone can have a library in their living rooms now. But this cheapness was confused with access. That everything is affordable is something, that is something, but that we have access to it is something else. We have access to culture for the industry means that we have access to its consumption as something to be always available, but its content is gone. So the point of culture is to liberate human beings from oppression, so making available without being able to use it for its purpose is, well, pointless. Quote, the abolition of educational privilege by disposing of culture at bargain prices does not admit the masses to the preserves from which they were formerly excluded, but under the existing signal conditions contributes to social conditions contributes to the decay of education and the progress of barbaric incoherence. So in other words, by making culture cheap, it simply made it available. But available means that it just sits there, like everyone walks by it and sees that it is there, and they be like, hey, we won, we are free, but no one is actually looking into it. No one is seeing its content, and more importantly, seeing its potential for the revolution. So, you know, when you say today that when you pay for something expensive, you take it seriously, well, it's kind of the spirit here. If things become cheap, then they lose their value in the sense that that you don't consider them seriously. It's like the industry knew that what mattered more is that culture becomes cheap rather than making it cheap so that we can democratize it, so that people would use it to change the world for the better, to bring about real communism. So Adorno says that in the 19th and 20th century, when culture was only accessible to the few who could afford it, when someone goes to the theater to watch an opera or a drama, they paid the performance the respect that it deserves. Their money symbolized a recognition of the merits of the work. And even when that merit wasn't recognized due to the money they put in to watch the concert or the drama, the citizen would try to build a connection between him and the work. Like, I spent a lot of money on that play, so I'm not going to let that money go to waste. I will do the efforts in order to get something out of this. Culturally speaking, I mean, I will get me some knowledge. So that's why people would make reviews or commentaries or guidebooks to plays and symphonies. There was at least this idea that whatever it is I paid for must add something valuable to me or to my life or even to society. So use value isn't much of the problem, despite that it was a precondition for the shift towards exchange value, but at least use value had some benefits. It is, true that expensive art kept citizens in different classes, but what Adorno is saying is that we deserved better than just, the dilemma, either expensive art and confined for just a privileged few, or cheap art but completely devalued. So the shift to exchange value meant that no merit would be recognized anymore. That's just a false dilemma that we've been, presented with. Either no merit recognized or only a few can recognize the merits of art. As Adorno says, art's unbounded proximity to those exposed to it, no longer mediated by money, completes the alienation between work and consumer, which resemble each other in triumphant reification. In the culture industry, respect is vanishing along with criticism. The value gives way to mechanical expertise, the former to the forgetful cult of celebrities. For consumers, nothing is expensive anymore. So, with the loss of the idea that art can be expensive, everything that comes from culture is now the same. nothing can distinguish between a Toscanini symphony and jazz, or today any hit pop song. Since it's the price that matters today, and we judge the value of something by its money worth, then there is no difference between two things that cost the same thing. What's sold at the same price as junk is also junk. A book that costs as much as a Happy Meal at McDonald's is a junk book. And when a book by Plato costs as much as 50 Shades of Grey, then Plato and James are equally valuable for their cultural contribution. So of course we don't have to make Plato's dialogues expensive to maintain their value and get people interested in them. Again, saying that either expensive but valuable or cheap but worthless is a false dilemma too. But the point is that we are at a time where culture is devalued. Art and philosophy and even science are all regarded as if they have nothing special, nothing to teach anymore. They're like, the next light novel or serial, the next comic book, the next contemporary art sculpture, the next magazine or the next tabloid. Really, any piece of paper with words on it would be equally valid as the symposium. And this is especially valid when people tell you that it's important to value the symposium over other cultural production. Like today, many people would deplore this. Many would be like, oh, it's a shame that no one respects or reads Plato. Like it's common for people to shame those who only consume magazines and comic books. And whenever I say that I have a YouTube channel on which I explain philosophy books, many praise me for that, and that and they say that we need more people like you and stuff like that. But these people also don't read philosophy. And when push comes to shove, let's say that philosophy is useless. They're like, the guy who listens to Toscanini on the radio. He's just glad that there is still broadcasting of classical music somewhere, but he won't really care for it. He won't really listen to it. Like the people I meet, they're glad that someone still values philosophy. Like they're happy that philosophy is still out there. They're happy about it because philosophy is important and it is better than many things that we consume. But that's just it. They're just glad that it is out there, that it is available. But they won't give a further shit about it. And that is just like saying that it's as valid as any piece of paper with words on it. The existence of philosophy through podcasts and YouTube videos is like the price for having the algorithm. So, as they say, the symphony is becoming the price for listening to the radio at all. And if the technology had its way, the film would already be delivered to the apartment on the model of the radio. It is moving towards the commercial system. Now, that second part about television, remember that the television was still in its infancy when Adorno and Horkheimer wrote this. So if you find it weird that they put emphasis on radio and not on television sets, it's because, well, everyone has a radio in their homes, while TVs were still extremely rare. But yes, the same thing about radio and serials would apply to TV as well. And they predicted it. If movies would find a way to infiltrate people's homes to make the consumption of movies even cheaper, they will do it. Netflix and chill would certainly give chills to Adorno and Horkheimer. And Adorno himself was kind of uncertain about what is the future for the culture industry with the arrival of television, but what he and Horkheimer are concerned with is how all of this is giving rise to fascism. Like we are creating the perfect mindset for the acceptance of fascism. We are creating a culture in which everyone is afraid that they will miss on something. Everything must be available. Everything must be cheap. Like those people suffering from obsessive disorders that they cannot get rid of the junk they keep at home. And whenever you tell them to throw something out, they will be like, but maybe it will be useful someday. Like they just want to go. They just want to think that everything is just sitting there on a pile for them to use at a hypothetical time in the future. And that's for Adorno the best precondition for fascism. Because then all the fascists have to do to get control over you is scare you into believing that something that you do not need and probably would never need is going to be taken away from you. So the fascist is the one who will give you tons of gifts, who will use comfort to make sure that you submit to their ideology. Quote, the public crowds forward for fear of missing something. What that might be is unclear, but at any rate, only those who join in have any chance. Fascism, however, hopes to reorganize the gift receivers trained by the culture industry into its enforced adherence. And that's it for today. That's the sixth section of the culture industry. Next time we will look at the last section of the culture industry. And as always, I hope that these videos are helpful to you and that they make the book easier for you to read. And as always, thank you for